Hello and welcome to my Guild Wars 1 Domination Magic tier list video. So Domination has some of the best skills in the game, as well as some of the most damaging skills. It's definitely overall like S tier rating for how good it is. Mesmer is definitely one of the best classes in the game. You can't really argue against this. The meta kind of disagrees if you think otherwise. So I don't have all of the skills unlocked. There's like 3 or 4 that I'm missing, but I'm just going to go over the ones that I have, and then I'll just go to the PvP rewards guy and just kind of touch base with the rest of them. So let me just travel really quick. Alright, so now that we're in PvE, let's just go over the elite skills. So we have Enchanters Conundrum. This causes foes to take longer to cast enchantments. The initial effect is that it deals some damage to target foe and adjacent foes if they're not enchanted. This skill actually can do like 100 armor ignoring damage on adjacents basically every 6 seconds. So if you can get enemies not enchanted, this is actually quite strong. I would actually rate this at A tier. It's definitely not S tier because it doesn't have unconditional damage because they need to be not enchanted, but it still is pretty decent. So, and the Hex is not bad, so definitely A tier. Energy Surge, S tier easily. This is run in almost every build, like our team comp that runs Mesmers. There's a reason it's really strong. Panic, S tier. Insane Control. One use of this skill can shut down a group of enemies and make it very difficult for them to get skills or spells off. Power Block in PvP is definitely S tier because it completely can change like what's going on in the fight. If you power block an enemy monk or like an enemy Ellie, an enemy Necro, or even an enemy Mesmer, this ability is insane in PvP. In PvE, I would say it's like B tier. It's like circumstantially useful against certain foes, but it's not the best. Psychic Distraction, S tier in PvP when used correctly, but when not, it just kind of sucks. In PvE, I would say this is like C tier. It's not very useful. It shuts down your own bar, and all you can do is spam it, so it's not nearly as good as Cry of Frustration, for example. And then I'm going to head back over to my guild hall for the other elites. So the other elites, Visions of Regret is okay. I just am not interested in running it, so I never bothered to capture it. So actually, just scroll down to them. So Power Flux is so bad I never even wanted to capture it. Interrupts a spell or chant, not a skill. I don't know why. It's an elite spell, so it should like an elite Mesmer Dom skill. So it should at least interrupt a skill, but can't even do that. This is like F tier. In PvP, it's decent because it can fuck with people's energy. Because, you know, 2 health degen or 2 energy degen for 10 seconds is decent in PvP. So in PvP, it's okay. But Power Block's still stronger. So I'd say this is like maybe C tier in PvP. But in PvE, this is like straight up F tier. Never run this. It's just terrible. Simple Thievery. There's some situations where this can be used, but like to steal like a broken monster skill. But aside from that, D tier. Visions of Regrets can be run. This is like, I would say A tier. I would say Energy Surge is better. Hold on, let me pull up something really quick. Okay. So in PvE, it has a 20-second cooldown. In PvP, it's 30. I've never captured this skill because I have 0 interest in it. I always opt for either, in PvE, I'll either use Energy Surge myself, or I actually usually just use Psychic Instability. Psychic Instability with Wastrel's Demise and Chaos Storm is a lot of damage on adjacents, and then you have like some interrupts, but I prefer hard control over just like shutdown hexes, and this is on a 20-second cooldown. With the reduction though, it's on like I think like a 12-second cooldown, but with the PvE fast casting reduction. So those are the elite skills. There's one skill I don't have unlocked, and that is Price of Pride. I would say this is F tier in PvE. There's no reason you should ever run this. It's just fucking terrible. 7 energy loss next time they use an elite skill. That's just like, why? Alright, so let's leave the guild hall, go back to PvE. Alright, cool. So let's just bring up the skills now. Alright, so we're just going to go through all of these. Alright. Just going to load them up. Alright, Aneurysm. I would say this is A tier. This is good if you have a bunch of energy surge mesmers, because what it can do is when the dude's energy, the target's energy hits 0, this can cause an adjacent spike, and it also causes other foes adjacent to lose energy. So if you use this correctly, you can just spike adjacent twice, once on the target and then another time on adjacent foes. And this can deal pretty high damage. If you like drain an enemy LA down to 0 and then hit him with aneurysm, it can deal like 200 damage. So this is definitely A tier, but it has like circumstantial use, and it like requires like coordination and planning to pull it off. Because like if you spike things down too quickly, you won't get any use out of it. So if they die too fast, but it's definitely really strong. Hits adjacent for good damage if used properly. Arcane Larceny disables a random spell. The skill becomes that spell. I don't really think this is very good in PvE. I would say this is like C tier. I don't know why you would run this. Like taking like Domination Magic is so good that getting a random spell with like low attributes is just not very good at all. And PvP this can be good because it can disable like enemy monk skills. So in PvP this is okay. But it doesn't. The attribute of that spell is still whatever it is the enemy's using. So unless you're disabling a Dom Mesmer, you're not gonna get like a usable spell. So I'd say these are both C tier. Arcane Thievery is a duplicate, same thing, C tier. Backfire, I would say this is S tier, just because if you put this on an enemy healer, they will just spike themselves to death, and with the cooldown reduction, it's on a very low cooldown, so it's not even close. It's like closer to like 12 or 13 seconds. So very strong. Blackout, this is a PvP skill. There might be some use cases in PvE where disabling an enemy's skills is useful, maybe for like certain bosses. I don't know. I don't really do like speed clears or high-end PvE, mostly just because I don't like to join groups. It has nothing to do with that I can't do it. I'm just like all about doing things myself for some reason. Like that's just how I've always been. So maybe it is used in high-end PvP or PvE. I have no idea, but it's like C tier, I would say, in PvE. Chaos Storm, I would say, is S tier. With 12 or with 14 Domination Magic, it does 240 armor ignoring damage, causes 20 energy loss over 10 seconds. Great with Psychic Instability, Meteor, Earthshaker, anything that knocks down adjacent and can hold foes into it. Some Winds of Change enemies don't even scatter, so you just straight up get tons of armor ignoring damage and energy denial, like energy drain on enemies, so definitely S tier. It can scatter. So maybe in like super high-end stuff, it's not ideal. So maybe that bumps it down to like A. But it really depends on the use case. So like generally, I guess it's like an A tier. Complicate, I would say is A tier. Interrupting a skill and then disabling that interrupted skill for all foes in the area for 11 seconds is very powerful, especially if you're fighting groups of enemies that all use the same skills. So if you just hit them with Complicate, you can just disable key damaging like threat skills. So definitely A tier, really strong. Cry of Frustration, easy S tier. It's on a 9-second, or no, I think it's like 8 seconds. It's on like an 8 or a 9-second cooldown with 13 fast casting, and it interrupts a skill and interrupts all foes in the area and damages them. It's one of the main parts of mesmerway that shuts foes down and damages them. Definitely S tier. So let's add the next set. So Diversion. This is a PvP skill. It's usually used on enemy casters and monks, or even like an enemy assassin, because it can mess up their chain to get a foe to stop doing something. In PvE, it's not the best because enemies don't live long enough for this to be useful. So in PvE, I would say this is like D tier. Empathy in PvE, I would say is probably S tier because 1, it reduces damage, and 2, if you throw this on an enemy that's just attacking, they will generally kill themselves with it on them. So you can't, and it's on like a 6-second cooldown, so you really can't beat that. I mean, general mesmerway team comps will just like burn through everything so fast that you don't need empathy. So maybe that bumps it down to A tier, but it's still so strong that if you have like 2 or 3 mesmers with empathy on your party, if they just throw those on enemy melee, the enemy melee just kills itself. So if it's blinded, it's not hitting you anyways, and then they can just like focus on other things. But It's definitely really broken, and on certain boss fights like Shiro, empathy is insane, and he just like spikes himself down. So definitely S tier in a lot of situations. Energy burn, even though mesmerway runs energy surge, you almost never see energy burn being run because the extra energy loss on the target while dealing damage is not ideal because it doesn't hit adjacent either, and it can cause the target to like energy to hit 0, which is not good. I mean, that's where aneurysm kind of kicks in, but I would say this is like B tier. It does like decent damage, but the fact that it needs to drain energy in addition to like the energy surge spam you're probably running, it's not ideal. So definitely B tier. Guilt, I would say, is B tier utility. Steal some energy from a foe that's trying to cast one of your allies. It's definitely really good if you want to just stay in domination and fast casting, so you're not speccing into inspiration magic. That's the way I would use it, but if you're running a BIP, you probably don't need it, but it's decent. You can run it. Hex Breaker, this isn't very useful. You're better off just interrupting a foe. It can be decent if, like, say, for example, enemies are spread out and you don't want to get, like, stolen speed put on you or something. It can be okay, but it's not the best. I would say it's, like, C tier. Ignorance, maybe there's some weird use case I'm not aware of, but this just looks useless. I would say this is F tier. I can't think of a situation where there's an enemy that's using high-impact signets that you need to disable them, so... And just target foe, it just hits a single foe. Like, I would say this is F tier. Mind Rack, I would say probably A tier. You can use this with aneurysm so that it lets you know when to use aneurysm, and then you can just deal like insane bursts off of energy loss. So like you could run energy surge, Mind Rack, like energy burn, just to help them hit their energy like low, like help to get it to 0. And then once it triggers, then you hit them with aneurysm for like 150, 200 damage. So it's pretty good. It's like A tier. It can help rack up damage against foes. It's good with like interrupts. Obviously, it doesn't work with hexes, so it doesn't trigger off of hexes. So definitely A tier. Mistrust, S tier easily. Causes, as a hex spell, that causes an enemy's spell to fail, and then they just take, like 100 nearby damage. Very powerful. It's in mesmerway for a reason. All right, some more skills. Overload. So Overload, I personally really like this skill, but it's definitely not S tier. It's A. It is definitely A tier. So the reason is, if you look at mesmerway comps and like general builds, and even if like you just see like your alliance or guild pinging mesmer builds, they almost never run Overload. The reason is because while it can help with the quick damage, like Overload into Shattered Delusions can deal like 140 armor ignoring damage on adjacent really quickly. The downside is you're throwing out more control and shutdown for damage, which is fine. You can do that. But usually they run like Mistrust, Energy Surge, Cry of Frustration, Shatter Hex. What else do they run? Like Unnatural Signet. Things, and then maybe like Spiritual Pain. So like they're just trying to deal damage. So like Spiritual Pain and Unnatural Signet are just unconditional damage. Whereas Overload and Shatter, while they can be used, like if you use them properly, they can deal just as much damage as those other skills. You're probably better off just dealing consistent damage than having conditional damage. But this is A tier. It can put out good damage. It's good with Shatter. If you're casting it on a 2-second spell, you can overload a foe and then hit them with Cry of Frustration, so they take 140, and then hit them with Shatter, so they take like 210 damage, all armor ignoring, 2 packets adjacent, 1 packet area, so that's pretty good. And that works in hard mode too, by the way, so it can be good when used correctly. However, if you have a bunch of mesmers interrupting things, it's hard to get overloads off, especially as the player, because the AI interrupts things so fast that you might find yourself not landing them. And also, if Mistrust is being spammed, Mistrust will cause spells to fail, also preventing you from, getting overloads off. Power Leak, this is a PvP skill. I would say this is D tier in PvE. It's just not very useful. It's used to fuck people's energy up, which isn't something that's generally useful in PvE. Power Lock, same thing, PvP skill. Interrupts a spell or a chance. If something just interrupts a spell or a chance, it already kind of sucks. You want skill interrupts, if at all possible, like if and when possible. So like Yeah, you really want. That's why Cry is used. Mistrust is used because it prevents enemy caster damage and just causes spells to fail. So Power Lock, I would say, is D tier. I'd never run this. Power Spike. This is like, I would say this is B tier. If it hit adjacent, it would be A or even S, but it only hits a spell or a chance, and Cry of Frustration is just much better, so you're going to be running that. Cry of Frustration, Tease. Tease is weird because it takes up the elite slot. So really like Cry of Frustration, Psychic Instability, those are your big interrupts. Power Spike isn't bad. It's definitely good in PvP because you can just quickly fuck, like if a monk's about to hit something with Word of Healing or cast it on himself, and if you hit him with a Power Spike, it just like usually kills them or like dooms them. So definitely good in PvP, but in PvP I'd say this is like B tier. It's not bad. It can deal some decent damage, but single target. Shame. In PvP, definitely good. In PvE, it's like much worse than Guilt. 10 energy to get 12 energy isn't very smart of an investment. 5 energy to get 13. I mean, you'll get a little bit more because this is at 12, so you'll be at like probably at least 14. But yeah, I think you get like 13 energy. It's not the best. It's okay in PvP because it can mess up the monk's energy and you steal energy, so you gain resource, they lose resource. PvP fights are long, so that actually matters. In PvE, this doesn't matter. You have a BIP, so I would say this is like D tier. Shattered Illusions, A tier, good damage. Combos well with Overload, even if you just spam Overload and don't even care if they're using a skill just to get them for the damage. Specifically, you'd use this on like physical. This used in this way, like say enemy physical that doesn't use skills often, you just hit it with Overload and Shatter just to put some damage on it. But this is good when used properly with Overload. Shatter Enchantment. I would say this is A tier. It really has closer to like a 12-second cooldown. Removes an enchant, deals like 100 armor ignoring damage. It can be helpful to spike. Like enchant removal can be really useful in PvE. So definitely A tier. Shatter Hex, S tier. I don't know why this hits 100 to, or it's like 120 damage, armor ignoring damage to nearby when it removes a hex, and it's on like a 6-second cooldown. So I don't understand why this is so good, but it is. Like, I know why it's good, but I don't know why they made it this powerful. Like, it should do, like 80 damage, maybe. Like, 120 at, like, 14 Dom. I think that's what it does. It's, like, crazy. So, S tier for sure. Let's go over the rest of the skills. Alright, Signet of Disruption. Interrupts a skill if they're hexed and then deals some damage, and it's a signet, so it costs you nothing. I'd say it's B tier. It's not bad. It's a free interrupt, but it doesn't interrupt multiple things. And in PvE, that's really what everything's about. It's about hitting multiple things. So like when you can't do that and you're using a skill and like you're incurring aftercast for using an ability, it's just not worth it. So this is B tier. Signet of Distraction interrupts a spell if they are, what is it? Disables for 4 seconds for each signet you have equipped. So this is F tier. You would never run this. There's no reason to run this. Unless you're running, I mean, if you're running like Unnatural Signet in this, it'll disable a spell for 4 seconds, or I'm sorry, 8 seconds. But that's not really very optimal. There's better ways of disrupting things. Complicate comes to mind. Complicate also can disrupt or disable all foes in the area. Like if you, like let's say you're like doing some difficult like, you know, content and then there's a bunch of enemy Ellies, for example, and you want to disable their elite spell. Complicate can do that. This cannot. So this is like F tier. Signet of Awareness. F tier, I guess. I don't know. I don't think this is very good in PvE. I mean, it causes weakness, but it's on a 30-second cooldown, and signets aren't reduced by fast casting, just spells are. So I would say this is like, I would say it's C tier. It's not horrible. Like the weakness is decent. It hits nearby weakness for free. That's not bad. That's honestly not bad. Like 10 seconds of weakness can mitigate damage. The energy loss can combo with the aneurysm to some degree, but it's like C tier. Spiritual Pain, A tier, just some filler damage. Deals bonus, like extra damage to hostile summoned in the area, like minions, spirits, and so on. But it's mostly just used in mesmerway, just for like cleanup damage. So like A tier. Unnatural Signet, definitely S tier. It does like 70 damage, armor ignoring. It's free. It casts in like 0.5 seconds. And then it does like 50 armor ignoring damage to adjacent if the foe is hexed or enchanted. And in mesmerway, they're going to be hexed. So you guaranteed get that adjacent damage for free. Definitely S tier because it's free. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, I couldn't imagine there being an Ellie skill like Signet of Fire Burst or something. It just does like 100 armor ignoring damage to adjacent and be like, and it's free. It's like, that's retarded. Like, that's so broken, but it's free, so S tier. Wastrel's Demise. I would say A tier. The reason it's not S tier is because there's a lot of enemies, or there are a lot of enemies that have really annoying skills that they can use, like monster specific skills that cast when they're knocked down and shut down and interrupted and whatever, and they'll just use them just to prevent this from continuing to rack up damage. It's great against casters that don't have like stances, but against like enemies with stances and shouts, it's just a pain in the ass because they just use some stupid fucking stance, and you're just like, ugh. Like, it's just dumb. So like with Psychic Instability, if you hit like an enemy caster and then throw Wastrel's Demise on them, it's great. So that's like S tier in that specific interaction. But against like the meleeers and against other things, it's like B tier because of like shouts and stances just ending it constantly, which is just a pain in the ass. So yeah, it averages A tier. Wastrel's Worry. Definitely A tier. Same thing with Demise. The main thing that will prevent the damage from triggering is if the enemy has either a monster skill that can activate while knocked down, or not using skills. Like if it's like, you know, you like spot on with the interrupts, but then it has like some skill that can't be interrupted that just casts that it can cause things to end. That's annoying. Stances will cause it to end. That's annoying. Shouts will cause it to end. Pet attacks, like stupid things like that. Definitely really good damage, but it's like A tier. You also might notice it's not run in mesmerway because it's conditional damage, right? You can run it with Psychic Instability. You can run either of these skills with Psychic Instability because both of them benefits from a foe being disabled for the 4 seconds. But that's my Domination Magic tier list. Overall, I would say Domination Magic in the metagame is S tier. Some of the skills in it are quite useless, like Arcane Larceny and Thievery are quite bad. Like Blackout isn't super useful in PvE. Diversion isn't very useful. Hex Breaker isn't very useful. Ignorance isn't very... Like, there's some skills that are just, like, dumb and kind of bad. But there's a lot... Like, the skills that are good are so good it's just broken. Like, Shatter Hex... I don't understand Shatter Hex at all. Like, this skill just blows my mind. Did I not... I don't think I covered Hex Eater Vortex. So Hex Eater Vortex is basically like Shatter Hex, but it's an elite skill. It has a longer cooldown, and it kind of sucks. Removes a hex, and then also can remove enchantments from foes near this ally. So the reason this isn't really good, I would say this is like C or D tier. The reason for that is Shatter Hex does more damage and has less of a cooldown, which doesn't make any sense at all because like more damage hits nearby, less of a cooldown. Less damage hits nearby, more of a cooldown. Oh, but it can remove enchantments. Okay, but you have to think about what is going to be near the ally that you're removing the hex from. So, and in your average case is probably going to be physical near your back line that's getting hexed. So you're going to be removing enchantments from a physical, maybe. This is just not a good skill. It's just like maybe there's some situations where it can be good. And might bump it up to like B tier, but in your average like gameplay, it's not going to be super useful. Most enemies aren't always spamming very high impact enchantments. Most enemy monks kind of run random builds with like it's either healing prayers or prots, and most of their prot isn't very good anyways. It's a very inconsistent way of removing enchantments from foes. If you really badly want to remove enchantments, like really, really badly, I've got a skill for you. And you can even run low investment to maintain its insane cost. So, I'm sure you're familiar with Auspicious Incantation. Let's head on over to Curses. Let's say you want to remove enchantments super badly. Actually, I might have to... let me see. How much investment do I need to get 2 enchantments off? Oh, quite a bit. Okay. I thought that's unconditionally removed 2. This is, it unconditionally removes 1 and then scales up to 2, so that's not nearly as good. But you can use Chillblains to remove... I mean, even with, like, no investment, you can remove 1 enchantment from every foe in the area and then get all of you... You can profit energy just with, you know, low investment and an auspicious incantation under Inspiration Magic. This isn't the most viable thing to do, but usually enchantments aren't that big of a problem, but if they are, you have some kind of weird option. But Enchanter's Conundrum comes to mind too. Like, this can mess up enemy enchanters, so... But yeah, that's Domination Magic. Definitely overall S tier. It's probably one of the best attribute lines in the game. But yeah, thanks for checking this out, and that'll be the end of this one.